Propitiation is used again in Romans 3, verse 25. And this number, the number for this word in Romans 3:25 is 2435. It ultimately, too, is rooted in 2436, the act of showing mercy. In Romans 3:25, let's read the verse, whom God hath set forth to be a propitiation through faith in His blood, to declare His righteousness for the remission of sins that are past through the forbearance of God. I want you to see how they've translated this word in Hebrews 9. In Hebrews 9, this is very revealing. In Hebrews 9, here is the same Greek word that they've translated propitiation. Verse 5. And over it the cherubim of glory, shadowing the mercy seat, of which we cannot now speak particularly. It's the word mercy seat. Interesting, isn't it? They would put propitiation in one place and mercy seat in another. Let's use mercy seat for both. In Romans 3:25, whom God has set forth, speaking of Christ, or foreordained, to be a mercy seat through faith in His blood. Now what does that mean? If you go back and look at the Old Testament word atonement, you'll discover that that is a verb. It is an action of covering. It means to cover. The noun of that verb in the Old Testament has been translated mercy seat. Mercy seat is the covering itself. The verb is to cover. The noun is the covering. An animal's blood would be shed as an act of atonement or an act of covering. But instead of putting that outward, looking at all of that outward, put it inward. Because if atonement is an outward thing, then somehow we'd see a picture of this wrathful, angry God, and He has a list of our sins, and somehow that has to be covered with the blood. There you have Christ standing before God saying, my blood, Father, my blood. He's covering you with His blood. He's protecting you with His blood. Yet if you put it inward, if you make it a spiritual thing of the Spirit applied to the inward man, He is covering my understanding by means of His blood. As the Father and the Son counsel together to save us, to bring us into harmony with themselves in our understanding. The action of covering us is atonement. The covering itself is the mercy seat. Paul writes in Romans 3, Christ was foreordained to be that mercy seat, or to be that covering. Now if you go look at the sanctuary that Moses erected, you'll see that the articles of furniture in the sanctuary were made of shittim wood. That's a hard, dark, thorny wood. Wood is a symbol of man's character in the Scriptures. That is a perfect picture of our character. But all of that old, dark, thorny wood was covered with pure gold. And gold is a symbol of faith. Whose faith? Christ's faith. Remember the message to Laodicea, buy of me gold tried in the fire. When He gives you His understanding, He is atoning. He is covering you. The result is the mercy seat. What was under the mercy seat? Aaron's rod that budded, a jar of manna. What do those represent? Aaron's rod that budded, that represented his authority to minister. He was the authority of God. That is under the mercy seat. It's a picture of Christ. What about a jar of manna? Manna was the bread eaten before they entered the promised land. It represents the Scriptures. But it too is under the mercy seat, meaning that you live as Christ gives you definition of it. But there was one other thing under the mercy seat. The heart of stone written with the finger of God. What is underneath that mercy seat is a picture of our understanding. We recognize Christ as high priest. We recognize we live according to His definition of the Scriptures. You don't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of His mouth. And you recognize, I have a stony heart, and if He does not write the 10 words, the 10 commandments, I will never understand. You see, with that understanding, you are covered. You're under the mercy seat. And the act of putting you there is atonement.
If you'd like more information about Scott Stanley and DTG Ministries, please visit dtgmin.org. That's dtgmin.org, where everything is free for the taking, and let God be God.